Okay, so let's continue on. This is part 2 of the lecture for Introduction to Forensic Science. So we left off on this slide. So let's go through some more terminology. Okay, so there are a couple of types of documents that are really common that we see in forensic science and in criminal investigations in general. And also in civil cases. So one is called an affidavit. And an affidavit is defined as a sworn statement a person makes before a notary, okay, which is someone who can officially, has the legal right to say that this document is legal, or they do it in court in front of an officer of the court, like a judge, asserting that certain facts are true to the best of that person's knowledge. So, for example, a police officer giving a statement in front of a judge is considered an affidavit, and that can result in a judge issuing a warrant for that person's arrest. A probable cause affidavit is another term for that. So, that is a summary of the evidence and circumstances of the arrest. Okay, so this is written by a police officer and given to a judge to review. So it means that, yep, we have probable cause to believe this person committed this crime, so please issue a warrant for that person's arrest. The difference is, so this is done by a police officer and it's for an arrest warrant. An affidavit can obviously fit into that category, but also any person can be called to give an affidavit if they are just reciting facts that they know about a particular case. So an affidavit can refer to a civil or a criminal case, whereas probable cause affidavit given by a police officer, and it's for a criminal case and for a judge to then issue a warrant for that particular person's arrest. Okay, that can then lead to an indictment. Okay, so an affidavit comes first, and then an indictment is where the facts of the case have been presented to a grand jury, and they have then voted and said that, yep, this person should be indicted for that crime, and they should answer for it, and they should basically go to trial. Okay, so it means that a person has been charged with a crime, basically. And a grand jury is different from a regular jury. It's actually, I would, if I had to go to jury duty, which I usually get excluded because of my previous job, but I would want to be on a grand jury. I think it's really good for people who have a short attention span, because you're not seeing the evidence from one case and following it from beginning to end, where you find the defendant either guilty or not guilty. A grand jury is you hear evidence on several different crimes and then decide simply whether the person should be indicted. So you're not saying, whether they're guilty or not guilty, but just, yeah, you know what? There is enough evidence for this person to basically be charged with this crime. That's what an indictment is. Okay, so a little bit about indictments. Indictments can be in 3 different levels. So they can be in what we call the local or trial courts. So for example, if it was, the city of Cedar Rapids versus Amy Clancy, or Lynn County versus Amy Clancy, that would be an example of a local indictment. Then they can be at the state level, and they can also be at the federal level if a person has committed a federal crime versus a state or local crime, okay? Which I think would be super intimidating. Can you imagine getting a document that's basically the United States of America versus you? I think that has to be a pretty awful feeling. So let's take an example of a criminal indictment from something that's currently in the news, and Lord knows, since November 13th, this has been one of the top news stories. So Brian Koberger, who was here in the center, has been arrested, and he is accused of committing quadruple homicide. in killing 4 University of Idaho students on November 13th, 2022, basically entering their residence and stabbing the 4 of them to death, and he was just recently arrested. So in his indictment, I've seen the probable cause affidavit, but I haven't seen the indictment yet. That would be the state of Idaho versus Brian Kohberger, because he didn't break any federal laws, okay? But he did break state and local laws, so this is seen as a state level indictment. Okay, now, a single person can be indicted at both the state and federal level, and the local level too. So you can really get 3 types of indictments, but most of the time when you see 2 of them, it's usually you've broken state laws and you've broken federal laws. Okay, so perfect example of this was Michael Vick, who was an NFL quarterback. I believe he's now retired. So he was convicted of basically running a dogfighting ring, and he was indicted at both the state level, which it occurred in Virginia, so state of Virginia versus Michael Vick, and he broke federal laws, so the United States of America versus Michael Vick. So yeah, you can be indicted at both levels, and he actually was convicted of both. So he served time first in state prison, and then he was convicted on federal charges, so he also served time in federal prison. So, you know, it's really kind of a double whammy when that happens. So I've answered a lot of questions about Michael Vick. Now, first of all, I teach veterinary forensics. You know, I'm a big animal lover. And I don't, Michael Vick, not a fan. Okay. And I've read a lot about him. This is a quote that's taken directly from his federal indictment. Vick, when he was accused, said, I didn't know they were running a dogfighting ring on my property. I'm never there. It was the people who live there. Well, there was evidence, and mostly video evidence, to suggest that he actually participated in the dogfighting. And when the dogs did not perform, when they refused to fight, he actually was involved in killing them. So he hung them, he drowned them, he would slam their body into the ground until they were dead. So, I mean, that, I'm not a Michael Vick fan. Whatever your feeling is, but that is directly from the federal indictment, and that's why he was charged and convicted. So obviously met the burden of proof in terms of those crimes. Okay, so in both criminal and civil court, there are 2 different verdicts, okay? So if someone is found guilty, that means they've been convicted of that crime. So that's a conviction. Then, if they have been found not guilty, so they didn't meet the burden of proof, whatever it was, okay, whether it's a preponderance of the evidence in a civil case or beyond a reasonable doubt, that is called an acquittal. So, keep in mind, and you'll hear this on the media, and it's actually incorrect when people say, oh, he was found innocent. Okay, no defendant is ever found innocent. They are found not guilty. So usually prosecutors will not, support an indictment and take a defendant to trial unless they feel like they have a conviction, okay? Every prosecutor, and really every defense attorney too that I've met, they're very type A, they're very competitive, they want to win, so they're not going to go to court, especially because trials are expensive, their reputation is on the line. So they're not going to do that unless they think it's a slam dunk. Okay, so when a person is arrested and they are indicted, that's because the police and the prosecutor definitely believe that this is a guilty person, okay? Whether that's correct or not, okay? I'm just saying that is their mindset. So when a person is acquitted, they're never going to be declared innocent. It's basically, we didn't have the evidence to meet the burden of proof. And so even though we couldn't find you guilty, we had to find you not guilty, okay? Which does not have the same connotation as a person being innocent. And let's face it, once a person has been arrested, they're going to be in the media. That's never going to go away. If they're on the internet, that's forever. So, in some respects, their life is already ruined, okay? Because that's what their reputation is going to be. That's what a Google search is going to bring up. So, no one is ever going to think that they're innocent. It's kind of like if someone said, let's say you were arguing with someone and they either said, okay, you're right, or if they said, well, you're not wrong. Okay, I would think that would mean, oh, I'm not wrong, so you mean I'm right. No, I didn't say that. You're not wrong. Okay, so not guilty still carries a connotation with it. It's like, well, you probably were guilty, but they just couldn't meet the burden of proof, or for whatever reason, that jury acquitted you. Okay, so either way, I mean, when innocent people who are truly innocent are arrested and brought to trial, a lot of times their life is still ruined anyway. Okay, one other thing that can happen is if a defendant is acquitted in a criminal trial, which is great for them, right? It means I'm not going to jail or prison and I'm not going to get the death penalty. They can then be turned around and sued in civil court, which has a lower burden of proof. Perfect example of this was the O.J. Simpson case, okay? And I was actually living in Buffalo at the time, going to graduate school, and O.J. Simpson was, kind of the gold standard of a Buffalo Bill. His name was up on the stadium. He's in the Hall of Fame. And then he was accused of murdering his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson. Just a complete circus of a criminal trial. It was the first trial nationally publicized where DNA evidence was admitted. And he ended up being acquitted, so found not guilty in the criminal trial. So goes free. However, Nicole Brown Simpson's family and the other victim, Ron Goldman, his family then sued him in civil court and they won, okay, because the burden of proof was less. However, that gives the defendant time to basically transfer all of their assets and say, oh, okay, you won. I'm supposed to pay you $10 million. I'm sorry. I don't have any money. Whoopsie-daisy. What am I going to do? Okay, so that's basically what O.J. Simpson did. If you believe in karma, O.J. Simpson was later convicted of committing an armed robbery and trying to steal back his own Heisman Trophy, which is, how humiliating is that? My own personal opinion, did O.J. do it? Absolutely. But I think they screwed up the crime scene so much, and by they, I mean the Los Angeles Police Department, that the jury had no choice but to acquit him. Because the chain of evidence, the scene was compromised. It was just, that is the number one crime scene screw up in American history, in my opinion, followed closely by the John Benet Ramsey case, where, basically they allowed the dad to run around the crime scene and contaminate everything. It's ridiculous. So anyway, but I believe that the jury absolutely reached the correct verdict, based on the case that the prosecution presented. But that can happen too. So you can be charged in criminal court and then be charged again in civil court. Okay, so I'm going to stop there because we're almost at 14 minutes and you know that I like to do these in chunks. Okay, so we will start here for lecture number 3.